It is July 22nd, 2020, here in this quarantine. I'm James Sims. And for this episode of The Elite, I was going to give you a rundown on all of the players in the NBA of which I consider elite. And for me, I've been following basketball since about 2005, 2006, as long as I can really remember. But a lot of these players right now, they came in after that. So I'm able to see a lot of the current players. I've seen a lot of their careers from start to where it is now. Some of the older players, of course, I'll get into, have are they have played for as long as I can really remember them playing. But as a basketball fan, with what I've been able to watch, what I've been able to see, I truly think that there is a select few elite players in this league. And just like I did with baseball and football, I separated them into three categories, kind of basically. There are the GOATs in basketball to me, which are to me it's really just LeBron James with multiple MVPs and multiple championships. Following him, of course, Kevin Durant, who has multiple championships and an MVP on different teams. And then you have Steph Curry, who's known as the greatest three-point shooter of all time, naturally. And following him, you have Kawhi Leonard, who's ended two teams' hopes of a three-peat as the best player on the team. But I'll really kind of get into it division by division, break down the power dynamics within the NBA, and I'll integrate kind of my own point system for how I'm going to watch basketball games this season, especially when it comes to the playoffs. Well, with the playoffs, they won't play. I mean, to finish the bubble, because in the playoffs the games don't overlap. But I have more of a priority point system when it comes to these players, especially when it comes to this upcoming regular season, because with the NBA basketball season, you can never know who's playing what games. And because I'm an Atlanta Hawks game, usually the Hawks will take priority because they're a very, very fun team to watch. But when the Hawks aren't playing, I'll still try to watch some basketball. And when it comes down to which game that isn't the Hawks, what am I going to watch? A lot of it comes down to which players are playing in the game. And out of all of my elite players, in addition to separating them by just where they are in their career, I was able to separate them by skill level, because I think in basketball, you have more of an opportunity to impact how well your team plays. And at this point, I think you can see how developed a lot of players, especially, are at their position, at their age, compared to their other NBA counterparts. And to me, I think I've separated these elite players because they're elite players. They've already crossed that threshold. But to me now, I feel like it's best to implement a point system as to decide which team I'm going to watch in a specific night depending on the elite athletes they have on their team. And then I'll go by team and break down the point system as I go by team, and hopefully they'll understand, and I'll make an example of my point system at the end. So with this system where I'm basically separating the all-stars from the superstars in this instance, I'm going to break to the East because the West is the stronger conference, and starting with the Southeast Division, starting with the Atlanta Hawks. They have the worst record in that division. They have the second worst record in the East. But Trae Young, to me, is the only elite player on the Atlanta Hawks. At 21 years old, he was named an all-star starter the first time he was named an all-star. To me, I think he's more than a one-pointer. I think he's a three-pointer. And to top that off, at 21 years old, at 6'1", and he's still the worst defender in the NBA, but he's still a three-pointer to me because at 21 years old, he was still second in the league in points and assists. And for everyone saying, oh, it's because he has no one on his team, not like there are a lot of people that are the best player on their team and still can't even do close to what Trae Young did for that Atlanta Hawks team. So to me, Trae Young at 21 years old is a three-pointer to me, which makes the Hawks a three-point team. And I'll continue with that as that one goes. Moving on, I don't believe the Hornets have anyone elite, to be completely real. I like Devontae Graham and Scary Terry, but to me, I think the Hornets need to just find some luck in the draft, because thus far is most definitely not working. Moving on to the Wizards, I think Bradley Beal, he's a great player. He's an amazing scorer, and he's 27 years old. He's in the peak of his prime. With everything he's accomplished up until now, I think he's a one-star. He's never been an all-star starter ever in his career, and he's always been in the East, which was never as good as the West. I think that if he were on a championship team, he wouldn't be the best player. Unlike I think if Trae Young were to lead a team into the championship, way later than he won't be 21. I assume he'd be the best player on a championship team. I don't think I could say the same about Bradley Beal. I think if he joined whatever team he joins next, if he were to join the Lakers, he'd probably be the second or the third. I think he'd be the third option on the Lakers, which is to show where I think he's valued in the NBA. And this is his prime. And he completely missed the playoffs, which I think he should have been voted in. But the fact that they completely overlooked him, I think, proves my point as to why I think Bradley Beal is a 1-point player, and the Wizards are a 1-point team. And if the Wizards played the Atlanta Hawks, it'll be a 4-point game just because you have a 3-pointer, Trae Young, playing against a 1-pointer in Bradley Beal. Additionally, going on, I don't think the Magic have any elite players. I think they're really towards the end because Vucevic is almost done. Aaron Gordon isn't really that great. Mo Bamba wants out. The Magic, they're nowhere close to where they were when Dwight Howard was dominating them. But it's not like it's been a super long time since the Magic were good. I think they just need to do a proper rebuild, start from scratch, find a player to build their team around. Because originally I think they thought it was Aaron Gordon, but now they know it's not Aaron Gordon. Moving on to the Miami Heat. This one might be one of my more controversial takes, but I don't think the Heat have any elite players on their roster. Even to me, I don't think Jimmy Butler is better than Bradley Beal. And Jimmy Butler to me is their best player. He's a great two-way player, and he's an all-star here and there, which is really good. But if we're talking about elite cream of the crop, if we're being completely real, I wouldn't watch the Miami Heat just because Jimmy Butler was their best player. And I'm a big basketball fan. If there were other games on, I would much rather watch them than the Heat. And I think Bam Adebayo might be on his way there, but he's not there yet. He earned his first All-Star game this season at a very, very young age. I'm curious to see as to what he's gonna do, but even with those two, Goran Dragic, I don't think the Heat have any elite players. To me, I think Trae Young is the most elite player in that division and the only other elite player out of the Hawks, the Hornets, the Wizards, the Magic, and the Heat. It's Bradley Beal. I think there's no question about it. The Heat one, I'm pretty serious about one. I don't think any of their I think a lot of their players are really, really good. They have an elite roster. If anyone should be elite, it's maybe Eric Spoelstra or Pat Riley for putting that team together. But I don't think any of the players in the Heat, I would consider them cream of the crop amongst other NBA players. Okay, so moving into the Central, starting with the Cavs. I don't think the Cavs have anyone elite. Kevin Love is kind of past that point, but I really appreciate everything Kevin Love has done. Because he really kind of hit his end when LeBron was in Cleveland. And then they also have Colin Sexton, who's looking pretty good, but to me, I don't think he'll really pan out. Same are going on to the Detroit Pistons. As much as I love Derrick Rose, I don't think Derrick Rose is necessarily elite. I mean, he wasn't voted to an All-Star game. It should be that simple. I don't even think he starts all of the games for the Pistons. I don't know if he's going to be moved back to Chicago. I have no idea what's going to happen with that. And even with Blake Griffin, I think Blake Griffin's fallen off. I think even with Blake Griffin averaging 28 points a game, I'm still not going to watch Detroit Pistons. I'm still not going to watch the Detroit Pistons. As good as Blake Griffin is there, because I think Blake Griffin is really, 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 really good. But to me, I think he's the level. You have to pass. You have to be better than Blake Griffin. You have to be more impactful to your team than Blake Griffin. Because as good as they were, the Pistons still lost 46 games, no matter how many games Blake Griffin played. In addition to them, you have the Chicago Bulls, which is another team where I don't really consider any of their young players elite. As good as Zach LaVine has been, I think I did not expect Zach LaVine to have the rise that he did. And now he's averaging 25 points a game at 24 years old, which is something that a lot of the people saw despite him coming off the bench at UCLA. I think he's good. I wouldn't consider him elite. I don't consider Lauri Markkanen is really on the way. I think Lauri Markkanen will be a very, very good basketball player. He's definitely shown that, but I don't know if I consider him amongst the young elites yet with what I've seen. Same thing with Wendell Carter. I like Wendell. He's going to be a really good player in that organization, but I think the Bulls young core is very good, but I don't think any of the Bulls players are especially elite. Moving on to the Indiana Pacers, kind of the same thing. As good as Oladipo and Domantas Sabonis are, Like they're a good like they're a pretty deep team all the way through, but I don't think any of the Indiana Pacers are necessarily elite, especially if Domantas Sabonis was the only player to represent them in the All-Star game. Now moving on to the Bucks, I think Giannis is the only elite player on the Bucks. As good as Chris Middleton is, I think Chris Middleton I think Blake Griffin is significantly better than Chris Middleton, and I don't even consider Blake Griffin an elite player. Like Chris Middleton is really good. He adds a lot to that Bucks team. I think a lot of people are overlooking the fact that Giannis is kind of like the Bucks team is deep all the way top to bottom, but for Chris Middleton to be a second best player, the Bucks are a lot better than they should be, and I think a lot of that can be attributed to Giannis, who I believe is a 3-star small forward, or he's a 3-point small forward that gives the Bucks it gives the Bucks 3 teams for when you want to watch them as a team, just like the Hawks. To me, I feel like the Milwaukee Bucks with Giannis, they're a little bit more watchable, but to me, they're as watchable as a team as the Atlanta Hawks are. But they're a little bit more because they're winning the East. But just because Giannis is on that team, because Giannis to me is as watchable as Trae Young, more watchable. So I mean, Giannis is the Bucks are a 3-point team. Addition to that, going to the Atlantic Division, starting with the New York Knicks. I don't think the Knicks are necessarily elite. I like their young core. I like Mitchell Robinson and RJ Barrett. That's really it. But to me, they're not elite yet. I think RJ Barrett could eventually reach it, but right now he's not elite. Additionally, with the Brooklyn Nets are crazy. I'll finish the division with them because I really have high hopes for the Brooklyn Nets. Going to the Philadelphia 76ers. I think Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid are both elite. I think they're both all-stars, but not superstars. I think they're both 1-point players because Ben Simmons is one of the best point guards in all of basketball, and I'll love watching him, but I'll necessarily consider him as like Trae Young was an all-star starter at point guard before him at a much younger age, despite being 8 inches shorter. And then there's Joel Embiid, who I think could be an amazing center. But, I mean, I don't think he's done what it takes to make me consider him an elite, cream of the crop superstar center. To me, he's an all-star center. He's a recurring all-star. To me, the 76ers are a 2-point team. Following them, you have the Boston Celtics, who have Jason Tatum and who have Kemba Walker. And right now, I think the Celtics are a 2-point team with the teams that they have. Because they're a good team to watch all the way through. But the 2 players that I think are the watchable players for me are Jason Tatum and Kemba Walker. Without Jason Tatum has ascended, I think Jason Tatum will eventually become a 3-star player. But consider the other 3-star players that are his age are like Luka Doncic and Trae Young, who are already averaging like 30 points a game and 9 assists. I think it's safe to put 22-year-old Jason Tatum in that. I think he's a 1-point small forward for right now because he's still growing and becoming he's becoming a better basketball player. But that team is making it into the playoffs. But yeah, I think Jason Tatum and Kemba Walker are both 1-point elite players, at least for right now. Moving north of the border to Canada. I think that what he's been able to do, add on to the fact that he has a championship and a most improved player, and the Raptors are still the best team in that division. Like, Pascal Siakam should still be recognized as elite, even though he wasn't playing to the level of a Kawhi Leonard. No, he was a starter for the Eastern Conference last year, and he deserves to be recognized as at least a 1-point player. To me, the Raptors are a 1-point team. I think Pascal Siakam is the only reason I would watch the Raptors in 2020, no matter how good they were. They're 23-9 at home and on the road, but they're a 1-point team to me. I don't really think Kyle Lowry or Marc Gasol are necessarily elite anymore. So that's kind of the system. That's the East, how the East stands up. To me, the only 3-star players in the East are Trae Young and Giannis Antetokounmpo at that point. But those are the only active players. Now, as I get to the Brooklyn Nets, that's where it gets kind of crazy. So, starting off, I'll start off with Kyrie Irving. They have Kyrie Irving, who is a 28-year-old point guard, who on a lot of other teams, I think because he's not necessarily a superstar level player right now, whereas he'll probably start at point. He would have started at point guard if Trae Young didn't this year. But because Kevin Durant's on his team, and because I kind of set a 4-point max, and you'll see as I do it more with the Western teams, to me, the Nets are the only 4-point team in the East because they have Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. And you have to get the 3 points to someone. And I'm giving it to Kevin Durant because, of course, Kevin Durant's already a goated player still in his prime. I mean, Kevin Durant is only 31 years old. Like, he hasn't fallen off yet, but he's still, like, the combination of Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant should be incredibly dangerous. To me, the 5 or the 3-point players in the East, if you go by my point system, you have Giannis, Kevin Durant, and Trae Young, which, going by the stats, I would say those are the 3 most watchable players in the East. And to follow that up, I'd say the most watchable teams. I'd say this upcoming season, the Nets are the only 4-point team out of the East. You have the Boston Celtics, the 76ers. They're both 2-point teams. The Bucks are a 3-point, and the Hawks are a 3-point, just based off the players they have. And as we transition to the West, I'll start on the coast, starting in the Pacific with the Golden State Warriors. The Golden Warriors still have Steph Curry and Klay Thompson. They both took last season off due to injuries, but they're still incredibly elite. And out of both of them, I'd probably give Klay Thompson the 1 point. I'd give Steph Curry the 3 points. The Warriors are they're a 4-point team to me. They're as watchable as the Nets. And when they make it to the playoffs, I wouldn't be surprised if the Warriors made the finals because they at least have that combo of amazing talent. Also on the Phoenix Suns, the only player I would consider elite on the Suns is, of course, Devin Booker because he's an elite young scorer. And to me, he might even be a player that leads the league in scoring, like with 35, 36 points and wins the MVP. I wouldn't be surprised if he put up a season like that. But to me, he's a 1-star. He's a 1-point player because he hasn't really he's been on the Suns for 5 years and they haven't changed playoff position ever. So that's kind of tough. Going on to the Sacramento Kings, I don't think any player on the Sacramento Kings that has played yet is elite. I think Marvin Bagley needs to play a full season for the Kings, and then I can fully assess as to whether Marvin Bagley is completely elite, but I have all the faith in the world in him. I saw him play. To me, he was one of the better. To me, I think he was if not Zion, he was the most dominant ACC player freshman at least, I've ever seen. Moving on to LA, starting with the Clippers. The Clippers have Paul George and Kawhi. Naturally, Kawhi is the 3-point player, and Paul George is the 1. On a lot of other teams, Paul George would still be a 1-point player, maybe a 3, but for how good he is, for how good the Clippers are, they should be recognized as a 4-point team alongside the Brooklyn Nets and now the Golden State Warriors. And then the other 4-point team in LA is the Lakers. And this is another weird situation where it's like, if Anthony Davis were on another team right now, I don't know if he'd necessarily be a 3. He'd probably be a 3-star, but probably not. But LeBron is the 3-star on this team, and Anthony Davis is the 1-star, making the Lakers the third 4-star team in their own division with the Warriors and the Clippers, which should prove out to be incredibly wild, especially as this next season comes up. Moving on to the Northwest, starting with the Minnesota Timberwolves. The Minnesota Timberwolves only really have Karl Anthony Towns, and to me, I think he's the only elite player on their team, but I think he's a 1-star. Naturally, Karl Anthony Towns is a walking 20 and 10 every time he steps on the court, but the Timberwolves don't really make it far with Karl Anthony Towns as their best player. A lot of it is the fact that he's a center and the offense doesn't run through him. He and Joel Embiid are kind of similar centers to me. But naturally, that's the Wolves. Going on to the Thunder, 35-year-old Chris Paul is still an elite player. To me, he's a 1-star because he's not like LeBron James or KD or Steph Curry. But he's leading the Thunder to a better record than the Rockets right now. So, I mean, that should definitely be considered. That should be understood when looking at this situation. But yeah, and Chris Paul, considering he's been this elite for this long, I consider him elite for being this good, this old. Moving on to the Jazz. The Jazz are a 2-point team to me because they have Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert. Rudy Gobert is the most dominant defensive player in all of basketball. So for that, he's a 1-star because he's not really dropping points like that. So of course he's a 1-star. Donovan Mitchell is a great young player who's almost on his way there and has proven like playoff success. But to me, he hasn't arrived there yet. And for his skill set, I still think he's a 1-star player. He makes the Jazz a 2-point team. Like they're really good enough to watch. You know they're going to make the playoffs, but they're not going to win, realistically. Moving on to the Denver Nuggets. out of the players that have played, and I'm not including Michael Porter Jr. because I like him. Dude, Nikola Jokic is the only three-star center to me in basketball. I like watching him play. The entire offense runs through him. He's a center that averages like 21 points. He's almost a 50-40-90 shooter, by the way. And he averages like 8 assists. Like as a 7-8 assists as a center. That's insane. You don't see centers like him. And just because of that, I think Nikola Jokic is a 3-star. He makes the Nuggets a 3-point team, at least with him being at center. And then finally going on to the Southwest, starting with the Spurs. As good as the Spurs are, I don't think any of the Spurs are necessarily elite, and it shows. And this season, they might miss the playoffs for the first time in a very long time since Greg Popovich has been the coach. Following, and then ahead of them, with the New Orleans Pelicans, for right now, here's another unpopular opinion. I think Zion Williamson, for the 18 games he's played, he's a 1-point player. Just because the offense, he doesn't run that offense. That offense runs through Lonzo Ball, and it eventually ends up with Zion Williamson. But until Zion can run the offense himself as the big man that he is, because of course, KD runs the offense in every offense that he plays in. Giannis runs the offense. LeBron runs the offense. So being 6'6" isn't necessarily an excuse. So and even Jokic runs his offense, and he doesn't really he's just a 7-foot guy. He might be the slowest guy in the NBA, but he's a 3-point player to me because he runs that offense. To me, Zion's a 1-pointer because until he seizes control of the offense from Lonzo Ball, he doesn't run that offense. And then after that, with the Grizzlies, I think Ja Morant is their only elite player, and I like their up-and-coming team. They're like the Pelicans. They have a lot of good young players. And even going back to the Pelicans, as good as Brandon Ingram is, I don't think he's necessarily elite. He's almost there, though. But moving on, I do consider Ja Morant one of the better young point guards in all of basketball. Seems as though he's going to win the Rookie of the Year, and he's helping the Grizzlies get into fighting a playoff position. Right now, they are 3.5 games ahead of the Pelicans, and it looks like they might secure it. After them, on the Dallas Mavericks. The Mavericks are a 3-point team to me. First of all, Luka Doncic is a 3-point player. Obviously, if Trae Young is a 3-point player, then Luka Doncic is a 3-point player because he has Trae's numbers, but he's at least bigger and he's in a better winning situation. And coming from the EuroLeague, he's more experienced at the pro level than Trae Young is, and which all combines for him being a better basketball player. So Luka Doncic, of course, superstar in his own right, 3-star, and just like Trae, he was voted to be he's supposed to be a starter in the All-Star game out of the West, which is harder to do than in the East, and so that's why I consider Luka Doncic an elite 3-point player. To me, Kristaps isn't I think Kristaps, don't get me wrong, has the same skill set that he does in New York. But to me, he's too injury prone. And another thing that alarms me about him is that he's 7'3" and he can't average 10 rebounds a game in a season, he will average a lot of blocks, but he doesn't average a lot of rebounds. He does kind of space himself out, and he does get hurt a lot. So he's kind of Kristaps is kind of all over the place. He's really good, but I wouldn't consider him elite. And then following them, I have the Houston Rockets, right? So on the Houston Rockets, you have Russell Westbrook, and you have James Harden. And with those two, I think you'd have to give the 3-star to Harden because, of course, Harden was not only a starter, he led the league in points this year. But no, Harden is that guy, and Russell Westbrook joined the Rockets to play with him. And it looks as though the Rockets are just like the Warriors and the Lakers and the Clippers. They're the only 4-point team in the West, and those 4 teams, along with the Nets, I feel like that adds up to those 4 teams being the most watchable teams in basketball. And you can argue with me no matter what. You can say all this, but I'm saying this is truly how I personally see the NBA. And I'll just kind of separate them and break them up into positions. But you can see how they play. You can see how the power dynamic plays out in the West. And I'll explain my point system in a bit. So it's with all the teams graded and all the players given their points and all the teams awarded theirs, I think this is the best way to gauge how good a game is if I really want to watch it. Like, for instance, if the Hawks aren't playing, But let's say the Brooklyn Nets are playing the Boston Celtics. That's a 6-point game. You get to see Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving play for a 4-point team, the Boston Nets, the Brooklyn Nets, and you get to see the Boston Celtics with Jason Tatum and Kemba Walker. That's 4 stars in one game. Of course I want to watch that basketball game. And one of them is a three-pointer. And of course, naturally, that would lead to the best games of the season being games where you'd see one of the teams, like say, if you see the Clippers playing the Warriors next season, that's Kawhi Leonard and Paul George against Steph Curry and Klay Thompson. So, I mean, that's an amazing game in itself. And once they're all back, it'll be amazing. Like, you can do it any combination. The Lakers, Rockets, Clippers, Nets, anything. And of course, there are those teams with other 3-star players. Like, you'd have even like the Mavericks playing the Hawks. I mean, the Hawks aren't a playoff team, but that's still a good game to watch because that's Luka Doncic versus Trae Young. Or you get a matchup where you see the Nuggets versus the Bucks. That's Giannis versus Nikola Jokic. Those are 2 highly impactful players doing what they need to do, and players that run their offenses, by the way. So that's what I'm envisioning when I'm talking about how I rate these teams based on how good they are. And even just going by position, because this video is getting incredibly long because I really do like talking basketball. In terms of point guards, the way I rated him, the oldest one being 35-year-old Chris Paul for the OKC Thunder. Then I consider Steph Curry. He's the only GOAT level point guard on this list. Following him, you have 31-year-old Russell Westbrook. I'm not really ranking them. These are just how old they are. Then you have 30-year-old Kemba Walker, 30-year-old Damian Lillard, and then you have 28-year-old Kyrie Irving. And younger than you have 23-year-old Ben Simmons, 21-year-old Trae Young, who I think is the best out of the young guys. You have 20-year-old Ja Morant, and one prospect that we have coming in, I think, is LaMelo Ball. I mean, I think he's proven what he's needed to, and Illawarra to be at least a very impactful player that can at least change the franchise that drafts him. And I imagine he's going to be taken pretty high. And to me, he's the only draft prospect that I would consider elite at this moment with everything that he's gone through to get to where he is now. Now, going through the shooting guards in the league, I would consider there's only maybe 6 elite shooting guards, starting with James Harden and Klay Thompson, sitting at 30 years old. Then there's Bradley Beal, kind of in the middle of his prime, playing, doing the best he can. And then you have the young shooting guards. You have Donovan Mitchell and Devin Booker, who are both 23. And then you have 20-year-old Luka Doncic, who is the best among the group. I consider him a shooting guard. He's not necessarily a point guard because they have Jalen Brunson on that team, but he's still a perimeter player that brings the ball up in the backcourt for that team. Now, going through the small forwards, you have, of course, the GOATs, LeBron James and Kevin Durant. And then you'd have Kawhi Leonard as well. You'd find the prime players who are doing well in the midst of their primes. You have Paul George. You have 30-year-old Paul George and 25-year-old Giannis Antetokounmpo. And then, of course, among the youngins. Out of the young players, Jason Tatum to me is the only young elite small forward in the league out of all of them. And I think he's really, really good at that. I think that's why he sets himself apart, especially at that position. And then another player I considered elite, who was only born in 2014, the youngest player on my list, Imani Bates, after being the Gatorade National Player of the Year, out of all high school basketball players as a sophomore. I mean, just that sentence alone should put you on to how good Imani Bates is. I'm touting him this highly, like this early in high school. I'm telling you, Imani Bates will be a force to be reckoned with in the league as of July 22nd, 2020. Following those two, looking into the power forwards. First, I think you have Anthony Davis and Pascal Siakam, who are both in the midst of their careers that are still putting on prime performances. And then you have the young guy. You have Zion Williamson coming in for the New Orleans Pelicans. Everyone's really loving him. He's on the cover of Sports Illustrated. I mean, he's of course that guy. And then out of the centers, I think Rudy Gobert, Joel Embiid, and Karl Anthony Towns, good centers. They're both one-star centers all in their prime. And then, of course, you have Nikola Jokic, who's a young center in the midst of his prime. But I think Nikola Jokic is the one center that separates from the other two, from the other three, I mean. in that his team lives and dies as he plays. So that's how I distribute the elite among the NBA. And of course, because this is my list of the elite, you can contend with whatever players you want. I picked players that I believe I believe would be well recognized, especially among basketball fans, at least elite. My 3-point system is kind of a person, like it's kind of my personal opinion on how I would want to be those teams. I would recommend a point system, so like so if there were just two complete random teams that you just wanted to see, like, oh, at that point you'd keep the elite players in mind, because at the end of the day, I'd rather watch the game with the more elite players in it if I'm gonna watch it for 2.5 hours, 3 hours. Like, I might as well watch like a really good game. But now I feel like with all of these players compartmentalized, and I have them all written down, I have them all profiled in my elite profiles. No, I think it's a good time, better than most, to see that, like, yeah, the NBA is a very talented league with players coming from all over the world with different talent levels. Like I'm saying, like, this is a really interesting point in the NBA, because this is the end, not the end. LeBron James is 35. He's one of the few remaining players from his era, alongside, Chris Paul, from when like Dwayne Wade and Kobe Bryant were dominating the league. Even like Kevin Durant, Steph Curry, Chris Paul. Like, there's still a lot, and even the players that are playing in their primes right now, they're playing within their own era. They've been playing, and we've seen a lot of dynasties come and go, especially since they've been with the Miami Heat, the Golden State Warriors. Right now, it looks as though the Los Angeles Lakers might win again. And then you have all these great young players that are coming into the league that look like that give you hope for when LeBron's out the league. Like, once LeBron retires when he's 57, or I don't know when, but within the next few years, you can trust that the NBA is left in the hands of these really, really, really good young players. And I will go in, especially on all of these players in their specific profiles. The only three GOATs out of the NBA, or the four GOATs in the NBA, like I said, are LeBron James, for being LeBron, Steph Curry, KD, and Kawhi Leonard. For every other player, I made an elite profile, and you can probably stream if you ever get the chance to, just to understand how I feel about these players. So I get to kind of lay out their legacies to show you why, once and for all, they're elite players for what they're doing. And if you think about it, out of all the millions of people that play basketball around the world, because basketball is a global international sport, these are the guys that not only made the NBA, that were not only all-stars. These guys were selected as the elite among the elite of the NBA players. And with that said, I really appreciate you for listening to all 32 minutes of hearing me talk about this handful of just amazing basketball players. I really appreciate you getting, like I'm saying, I really appreciate you for listening to what I have to say for all these minutes. With all that said, just watch the NBA, man. Finish out the rest of this bubble season, and if you get a chance to watch the playoffs, and then start watching some more regular season games next year as the season picks back up. But with that said, I've said my piece. Thanks for hearing me out. Peace out, and I wish everyone well, especially with this time.